Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. Will the 2012 deficit be higher than 2011? TT must move 20 spots on the Global Competitiveness Index. All of this as the country continues to look at the Section 34 fiasco, the fallout from that governance, the budget. What can we expect? Joining us on set now, one of the country's leading business personalities, the Chief Operating Officer of the Answer McCall Group of Companies, Gerry Brooks. Mr. Brooks, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Hema. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Will 2012 deficit be higher than 2011? Looking at the economy at this time, it's no secret the revenue stream is under some pressure. Government's expenditure profile continues to expand. The use of austerity measures has been thrown in. Deficit continues to be in our vocabulary. What are you expecting the minister to say on Monday?
I am expecting the minister to do a number of things. One is I'm expecting the minister, in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, where we have run 4 years of deficit budget, where our fiscal space is declining because our debt to GDP ratio is approaching 50% plus, and where you have to treat with a CLICO $8 billion of spend in 2012, I'm expecting the minister to do a couple of things. One is not to come with a one-year budget. He has to come with a 3 to 5 year plan. The partnership is in the third year of its life. I'm expecting him to come with a 3 to 5 year plan that says, in the context of the deficits that we've run, declining fiscal space, here's what the country is going to do over the next 3 to 5 years, and locate the 2013 budget in the context of that. The second thing I'm expecting the minister to do is to increase the level of accountability. I have outlined several initiatives in the 2012 budget. Here's where we are on those things. Here's where we are on the public procurement legislation. Here's where we are on the Insurance Act. Here's where we are on the beverage container bill. Here's what's happening in terms of IPOs that we promised. The third thing that I'm hoping that the minister will do is that he will separate the politics from the economics and be really transformative. That's going to be a challenge, but he's a new minister. He comes from the private sector. He has to make some very hard choices. The fourth thing I'm expecting, and I'm hoping that the minister will do, is to focus on growth. We have to grow our economy, and we have to catalyze it, and a couple of things need to be done to catalyze the economy.
Before I ask about where this growth is going to come from, you're talking about accountability, transparency, changing the way things are done. Now, when Mr. Howe first came into office, everyone expected great things. He comes from the banking sector. He was part of private sector, understands transformation and the need for tough decisions. He's in a system where accountability, governance, and hard decisions doesn't come very easily.
That's correct.
How are we going to change the model?
He is going to have to work with the government and the government agencies, and he's going to have to work ministry by ministry in the case of each model. So it's not going to come overnight. It's not going to be easy. And perhaps it starts with cabinet, even at the cabinet level. And let me just use perhaps Section 34 as an example. Where you have a case of a note coming to cabinet, and a minister saying, I have spoken to A and I have spoken to B, governance at the cabinet level needs to change. In the case of ministries and state enterprises which are not performing and which don't have a social purpose, one needs to ask the question, what is the size of government, and rationalize government? One needs to take a decision around state enterprises that aren't performing, and one needs to demand accountability. So it really is on a ministry by ministry basis, looking at government, looking at governance, looking at accountability, and driving that process. It is not an overnight process.
Not an overnight process. We're talking about pockets of growth, and we have been in periods of negative growth for the past 3 years. TNT must move 20 spots on the Global Competitiveness Index. We ranked, I think, in 84, which was actually where we've been for the last 4 or 5 years within that bracket. Barbados is actually at 44. Jamaica is at 87. Competitiveness, efficiency, productivity. It doesn't look very well.
No, it does not. In fact, if you take a look at the Wood-Mackenzie report, it says that we are number 99 out of 103 territories in the ease of doing business from an energy standpoint. So perhaps let me just use energy as a jump-off point in terms of ease of doing business. Today, plants are moving from current locations to the U.S., being attracted by, one, low-cost energy, but also being attracted by the ease of doing business. So you have firms going to places like Louisiana, where the Louisiana governor and the Louisiana state authorities are saying, we shall help you in terms of human resources. We shall help you in terms of finding people. We shall fine-tune the regulations to make the ease of doing business a lot easier. And we need to learn some lessons here in Trinidad and Tobago. We need to do a couple of things. One In the case of VAT refunds and VAT payments, we need to sharpen those because cash flow is the lifeblood of business. Customs and excise, we need to fix customs and excise. We've made the right step in terms of Asikuda, but we need to make the next step. Port efficiency needs to improve. So there are a host of things that we need to do. Work permits and the way we grant work permits, we need to accelerate the way we grant and support work permits. The Environmental Management Authority, where CECs are required, one is to fast track the granting of approval so that the whole bureaucracy around how we drive foreign direct investment and how we attract and bring plants up to speed so that one lowers the period from a 36-month period to perhaps a 24-month period, and where you're relocating plant, we're able to facilitate that. So there are several things around VAT, around work permits, around customs, around the port, around government facilitation that need to improve.
Ms. Brooks, interesting that you mentioned VAT. We had the Minister of Finance on set, and he made it specifically, actually was very clear on the matter of the tax regime not being fully reviewed at this time. He didn't want to expand on those plans. The government's revenue stream is obviously under attack at this time. It's under pressure. The expenditure profile continues to be expanding, or continues to expand. Where is government going to find the taxes? And at a time when they must encourage growth, how is he going to find the balance in encouraging business, yet at the same time increasing its revenue stream through taxes? And is it something that you would advise?
I would not advise that we complicate the tax system any further. On the specific question of VAT, I think we need to accelerate refunds, because when one is dealing with the small and medium-sized enterprise sector, it is cash flow which is the lifeblood of business. You asked me a number of questions in there, and perhaps I'm going to break it up a bit. In terms of revenue, I do not see much upside from a revenue standpoint. Oil prices are relatively high at this stage. Yes. The average oil price is in the US 102 range over the period, and certainly from a gas standpoint, the budgeted price of $2.75, we've been able to generate a price of about $2.91, which means that our revenues from a gas standpoint should be quite robust. I think in the short term, we have to, one, address the diversification question, but more importantly, coming back to revenue, there's not much more upside in revenue unless we increase taxes. And I do not recommend that we increase taxes at this stage. What I recommend that we do is that we increase entrepreneurial and activity locally. A couple of things need to be done from a revenue standpoint. One is that we can get the lease operatorships going, which means we have an oil production problem. Our production is averaging 82,516 barrels per day. We have to get that up. Lease operatorships is a way to get that up, which is where we get these small pools of 1,000 barrels, 800 barrels, and we accelerate that. I think simultaneously we're also going to have to adjust the supplemental petroleum tax to move it away from tax on production and to put it more toward profitability. There's some good news around the Bayfield fine, and there's some good news around the Petrotrin fine. That, however, is a 5 to 7 year play in terms of revenue. The other issue is gas availability in the Point Lisa's estate. We have got to work some supplemental agreements with swing gas producers to improve the gas availability. How does that affect revenue? It affects revenue because plants are now operating at around 90 to 91% of nameplate capacity. If you're operating at 90 to 91% of nameplate capacity, it means that you are not generating full revenue. You're operating suboptimally. There's about maybe 30 to 35 million US dollars per plant available, multiplied by 10, 15, 20 plants. And if you take a tax rate of 35%, there's about 100 million US dollars more in revenue inside of there. So that's certainly something short-term which is available to us. From a diversification standpoint as well in the energy sector, we need to take a look at our business model in the energy sector. So my advice specifically would be, I would not look to increase taxes. On the revenue side, certainly there's some low-hanging fruit in terms of lease operatorships. There's some low-hanging fruit in terms of gas availability. The exploration activity by the ministry at the recent bid round is positive and good. And then we need to try to drive some export-led earnings through the manufacturing sector.
Looking at diversification, you talk about growth. Where is this growth going to come from if our competitiveness is not very attractive, the ease of doing business is not attractive, looking at where we are in productivity, unions are always up in arms. Where, if you look at foreign investors, even you talk about encouraging the entrepreneurial spirit. People are not confident in this system. They don't believe if you go in there, you're going to create and be in an environment where you are globally competitive, profit-driven. There are a number of issues and a number of circumstances that face people that are beyond their control.
You asked me a number of questions inside of there. In terms of where is the growth going to come from, I talked about, one, the gas availability play, the lease operatorship play. We also have to diversify in the energy sector and outside of the energy sector. In the energy sector, I would propose that the model that we have used with the NGC and with Petrotrin were relevant and valid models in the 1990s and in the 2000 period. With the opening up of acreage in Ghana, Tanzania, French Guiana, Suriname, we have to dramatically change our model to more of an export-led model. What I would propose is that we need to take acreage in these new provinces, but we also need to set up joint venture teams which are very strong in negotiation, good commercial and legal attorneys, good accountants, good people who can negotiate well and who understand the energy sector to participate in some of these new acreages. We cannot repeat the errors of gas to liquids, and we can't repeat the errors of the aluminum smelter, but we have to, one, participate in these new areas of acreage, and the second thing that we've got to do is that we've got to diversify downstream. Outside of the energy sector, there's some diversification plays that we can engage in.
What are these diversification plays?
Number one is we've got to catalyze the economy, and construction is the way to catalyze the economy, to ramp up employment, to use capacity which is parked, and to take advantage of capacity in the marketplace, which we have developed, and to export some of that. So one, I think we need to pay contractors. Two, we need to increase local content on some of the large government projects. And we have to be extremely careful in the case of foreign companies which come to Trinidad and Tobago, which set up a single ex-company Trinidad and Tobago, and when the economy slips, they simply leave, and they leave contractors hanging. So I think construction is a significant play. Manufacturing is also a significant play, and that's where I think there's a role for the BDC in terms of the insurance, the export insurance, and the research and development through Exim Bank. Sorry, I said it incorrectly. Exim Bank in terms of the export insurance, and the BDC in terms of research. But we are at a point where we have to improve the port, improve some of the inefficiencies in the system to help manufacturers to go out there and to generate export-led growth. There's also an opportunity back in the energy sector to have the 50 to 100 service companies on the back of government-to-government arrangements go out to the Tanzanias, go out to the French Guianas, go out to the Surinams. It's a model used by Norwegian companies, and it's a model which has been successfully used by Canadian companies.
The CL financial fallout, confidence in the system, do you think that that mess has been effectively dealt with, and do you think we are now confident in our system? I
have to compliment the government. The government has done a good job in terms of the bonds and the taking up of bonds. My understanding is that approximately 86% of the bonds have been taken up. NEL 2, which is the Republic Bank model, that needs to be dealt with swiftly and taken off the table. There are some issues around CLICO that have not been dealt with, and some of it goes back to Section 34. You cannot have a situation in which CLICO, which is at $8 billion in payout today, and a $15 billion bill, which is approximately 18 times the airport, which was $500 million, not a prosecution. Nobody has been called to account. Conflict of duty and interest for directors, breach of directors' duties, a huge cost to the public, and not a single prosecution in this matter. We need to bring the talk show, that is the Commission of Inquiry, to an end. We need to pass that file to the DPP, and we need to prefer charges as appropriate, both from a criminal standpoint and take the appropriate civil action under the company's legislation and under the appropriate financial services legislation. So that's something that needs to be dealt with, and that certainly will demonstrate to people that there is accountability, especially where public funds are involved.
Do you think there's accountability now?
I do not think that there's enough accountability in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't think it's good enough for a chairman of a state enterprise to say one day there's $240 million in profit, and the next day there's no profit. And you see day after day statements and stories breaking about accountability at the state enterprise and even at the government level. So I think that there's a lot of work which needs to be done from a governance standpoint. It has to be systemic, it has to be systematic, it has to be deliberate, and there has to be that robust platform that supports it. And where there's a breach, there needs to be swift action in terms of prosecution, a la Madoff, a la Stanford.